What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to today's video. My name is ProJakers. Today we're diving into something that I've been wanting to talk about, and if you're a part of Gen Z, which most of my audience is, this is going to hit close to home. We're talking about why our generation is literally the most anxious, depressed, and mentally unstable generation in human history. I'm not that much older than y'all. I'm 23, and this isn't some generational hate piece. This is about understanding what happened, because the statistics are absolutely terrifying and they're only seeming to get worse. We're looking at unprecedented levels of anxiety disorders, panic attacks, depression, and suicide rates among people aged 18 to 25. So sit tight, because we're about to break down exactly how an entire generation got psychologically destroyed and why the solutions everyone's pushing seem to be making it worse. But I want to start off with the facts and some statistics because they're genuinely shocking. According to recent studies, over 60% of Gen Z reports feeling anxious or depressed most days. And that's not just having like a bad day, that's clinical level mental health issues that are affecting a big portion of an entire generation. And compare that to millennials at the same age, around 45%, and Gen X about 30%, and boomers when they were young adults was less than 20%. So we're looking at anxiety rates that have tripled in just 2 generations. And it's not just anxiety. Gen Z has the highest rates of depression, panic disorders, eating disorders, and self-harm of any generation ever studied. So the suicide rate for people aged 18 to 24 has increased over by 40% since 2010. But what really gets me is people act like this is normal and like it's just mental health awareness improving, and so we're diagnosing more cases. That's complete nonsense. You don't just go from 20% to 60% because of better awareness. Something fundamental changed. And in theory, you'd think that the rates would actually be down realistically because we have better tools and better understanding of how to treat these things. I think with the aspects of daily life and how things are today in 2025, it's harder for people to manage this stuff, and there's a lot of outside influences causing people to be this way. And there's a statistic showing Gen Z reports feeling overwhelmed by daily life at rates never seen before. And we're talking about young, healthy people in the prime of their lives saying that basic existence feels unmanageable. And before anyone says every generation thinks the next one is weak, no, previous generations did face world wars and economic depressions, literal survival challenges, and Gen Z's having panic attacks about Instagram stories and text message response times. But granted, we are dealing with a damn near impossible job market and inflation at a rate never seen before, so we do have our own challenges, that's for sure, especially as adults. But let's address the elephant in the room: social media. But not in the way that you think. Because everyone talks about social media causing anxiety, but they don't really explain exactly how it rewires your brain from childhood. And Gen Z is obviously the first generation to grow up with smartphones from elementary school. You didn't get social media as teenagers who already had established identities. You got it as children when your brains were still forming their understanding of reality. And here's what it did. It created a generation that measures self-worth through metrics, likes, followers, views, comments. These become your dopamine sources before you even understood what self-esteem was supposed to come from. I personally didn't have a phone till I was like in 7th or 8th grade, I think, and you know, this is like 2013 or something when I even got Instagram, and it was just nothing what it was today. And so I can't imagine being in elementary, being that young and getting that stuff and having TikTok and like all that access to the stuff we have today. But previous generations compared themselves to classmates, neighbors, and maybe celebrities in magazines, and today people compare themselves to everyone, everywhere, all the time, especially due to social media. And think about it, people wake up and immediately see highlight reels from hundreds of people, everyone's vacations, everyone's relationship, everyone's success, everyone's perfect breakfast, and the brain will process this as everyone is doing better than me, even though it's all performance. And the algorithm makes it worse. It shows you content designed to trigger engagement, which usually means triggering insecurity. The app learns what makes you feel bad about yourself and feeds you more of it, because that's what's going to keep you scrolling. And here's the part that breaks my heart. Like, Gen Z developed their social skills through screens. You learn to communicate through apps that reduce human complexity to emojis and short responses or talking in memes. No wonder face-to-face interaction can feel overwhelming for them. That's why some people call it the Gen Z stare. And I've talked about the result already in other videos. It's a generation that feels simultaneously hyper-connected and deeply lonely. You have hundreds of friends online but struggle to maintain real relationships. And they get validation from strangers but feel invisible to people in real life. But let's talk about something that's been weaponized against Gen Z, which is the achievement culture that we were raised in. Gen Z grew up in a participation trophy era, and here's the twist everyone gets wrong. You also grew up in the most competitive academic environment in history. You get trophies for showing up, but you also get told that college acceptance rates were at an all-time low. We were simultaneously told that we were special while being forced to compete harder than any previous generation. SAT prep, resume building, extracurricular optimization. Childhood became a college admission strategy for some people. And social media amplified this into insanity, because now academic achievement, career success, relationship status, and even hobbies became content for optimization. And everything became performative. Nothing could just be enjoyed. It all had to be documented and validated. The result is that a generation that feels like failures if they're not constantly achieving and sharing those achievements. Taking a mental health day feels like falling behind. Not having weekend plans feels like a social failure. Being single feels like a personal inadequacy. But the cruel irony is all this achievement pressure created a generation that's paralyzed by perfectionism. You're so afraid of failing that you avoid trying. You're so afraid of being judged that you avoid putting yourself out there. And I see this constantly. Gen Z individuals with incredible potential who can't make decisions because they're terrified of making the wrong choice. Everything feels permanent because it might end up on the internet forever. And Gen Z is the first generation to grow up with unlimited access to information, and it's mentally destroying us. You know about every crisis, every injustice, every problem in the world in real time. Climate change, political corruption, economic inequality, global conflicts. Previous generations learned about world problems gradually. You get them all at once, constantly. Our feeds are filled with urgent causes, emergency fundraisers, and calls to action from dozens of issues simultaneously. People can feel guilty for not caring about everything and overwhelmed when you try to care about anything. And the information comes with zero context or solutions. You see problems but rarely see progress. We see outrage but not resolution. Our developing minds interpret this as the world is ending and there's nothing I can do about it. Add in the fact that you can Google any symptom and convince yourself you have every disease, research every worst case scenario for any decision, and find online communities dedicated to worrying about anything you can imagine. Previous generations lived with uncertainty and learned to be okay with not knowing everything. Gen Z has access to infinite information but lacks the wisdom to process it healthily. Information without experience creates anxiety and not understanding. The result is a generation that feels responsible for fixing everything while feeling powerless to fix anything. We're exhausted by the world's problems that we can't control and guilty about problems that we're not actively solving. Now what really pisses me off is the solutions being pushed by Gen Z are making everything worse. Practice self-care, but self-care became another performance metric, and now you feel guilty if you're not meditating, journaling, working out, and eating perfectly, and maintaining the perfect morning routine. Go to therapy, but therapy became trendy content. Now people compete over who has the most interesting trauma and the most profound therapeutic insights. Healing became a personality trait. And set boundaries, but boundaries became an excuse to avoid any discomfort or responsibility. Can't handle criticism? That's a boundary. Don't want to help friends? Protecting your energy. The mental health industry has turned anxiety into an identity. Instead of teaching coping skills and actually applying the things I just mentioned in a healthy manner, it's teaching people to center their entire lives around managing their mental health. And that's not healing, that's making anxiety your full-time job. And social media turned mental health struggles into content, which is honestly fucked up in my opinion. Now people perform their anxiety for likes and validations. The very platforms that caused the problem are monetizing the solutions. And on a personal level, like, this does bother me a lot, because if you've watched some of my previous videos, I mentioned that I work with addicts, but before that I also worked primarily in mental health, and I've worked with people who are actually diagnosed with very severe cases, you know, stuff like schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD, you know, real PTSD. Like, I've seen very severe cases of this stuff, and I've seen what it's actually like for people to be diagnosed and live daily with these actual issues that are thrown around so loosely on social media, and that shit is not pretty to see, and it's pretty much crippling for some of these people. And I personally think that a lot of these people are self-diagnosed too. Not everyone has been clinically diagnosed with some of this stuff that they talk about, because if you really struggle with some of the stuff I've seen in person and worked with people on a clinical level, I don't think they'd be all trendy on social media and posting about it like that if they really went through that stuff. That's just my thoughts. And look, I'm not saying Gen Z is weak or doomed. Like, we're dealing with challenges that no previous generation has faced, and we're doing it without a roadmap. But the current approach is not working. Talking about mental health constantly and optimizing self-care routines and turning therapy into a personality trait is not reducing anxiety rates, and it's proof because they're actually increasing. Maybe it's time we try something radical, maybe logging off, accepting that you can't control everything. Focus on building real skills, build a business, real relationships, instead of managing your anxiety as a full-time job. The generation that grew up online might need to learn how to live offline, and that's not regression, that just might be evolution. That's all for today. Let me know if you recognize yourself in any of this or if you disagree with my take. And remember, your worth isn't measured by your productivity, your content, or your optimization. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is just be okay with being ordinary. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe if you want more reality checks, and I'll see y'all next time.